Hi, I'm Joan Gracie. My counterpart, Eric Nealon's PhD. I'm not. But we come together very nicely and talk people, talk human capital, talk brain-based thoughts and methodology. I want to thank our followers. I want to thank the great questions that were posed to us. We're talking today about data as it relates to people, as it relates to employees, not as it relates to sales. And boy, oh boy, is that disconcerting for people who hire other people, right? Because they've never had to do it. So it almost makes it seem like that elusive environmental question. Is this really global warming or not, right? And as part and parcel of that, why do you then think, because I've done research on this, Eric, and in Europe, those organizations know exactly what the cost of their people product is. But in America, we're still so concerned about that external customer. And even though we hear about the cost of disengagement and absenteeism and how companies are more profitable when they know the data, you still see that, that resistance to the information.
Well, and another thing I guess I would tweak there just a little bit is I do think that there are companies and organizations that do understand the value of really genuinely and accurately knowing their performer. And I don't think the two are necessarily disconnected, but I think most people are not aware of that. If they're hiring the proper person and the proper person is in fact congruent with the job posting itself and the job position itself, that will then lead to more success with their external customers and their sales. But I think making that connection is really challenging for people. And I think a lot of times it's challenging for us to take the time, the energy, the money, the resources to actually figure out who that individual is, the success of that particular position, what really needs to be there. And it tends to be so much more externally driven. And yet you do see that there are companies that are able to take that step, take that initiative, that preemptive strike, that are successful. So you do see the Amazons, you are able to see that there are the Wegmans of our area that take that research approach, and you do see success. And it's funny that so many companies I think want to emulate them, but they just want to get to that result without putting in the time or energy to do it.
And they don't realize how they literally stop their growth to get this internal customer thing right. Right? Which again, to your point, is such a bold step. But I think I kind of go back to this whole caveman brain theory in that obviously, fundamentally, we have the same infrastructure, right? And we've started in this work world with this 200-year-old word called employee, right? So fundamentally, how many baby boomers, as much as they say, you're my most valued possession, as much as they have these beautiful visions and mission, how many organizations really have even attached themselves to the idea that people are their most valuable asset? Have they even reconciled that mentally? Or is that external customer king? And if that is true, then if you get this internal customer right, they truly are going to be king. But they haven't even reconciled with that. And again, I think it's so much the way that we view the people who work for us versus as this cherished, valued resource.
And I think what's so then important to that, and what really is the focus of today's presentation or talk, is how do you know what your most successful employee is? And is it accurate, or is that your own biased opinion to it? And are you using the proper assessment and rubric to be able to do that? Because as you clearly talked about in many of your coaching, which is phenomenal to go through, you talk about this internal filing cabinet and the files that are filled in there, and everyone has those files. But what's so important is that the files that are within your cabinet are different than mine. But you're the one evaluating me, meaning that you're evaluating me based on the file in your filing cabinet that may fit with you, but is it fitting with what the company? Is it fitting with the culture that we live in? Is it fitting with the generational gap that we exist and live in? And I think that's where now you start to ask those questions. And to the people who are viewing, do you have the proper solution, the proper assessment, the proper rubric that's genuinely getting at that accurate information.
Without a doubt. And again, you know, it's funny, I went through a military training exercise. It was a really, really cool exercise because it takes you through what should be that perfect approach to a particular project, right? So you start with that whole vision, you go to planning, then you go to execution, you make sure the white noise doesn't kill you. But what I see in companies is never that recognizance. It's never that final step of saying, how do we do?
Right.
How do we do? And you know what I hear, Eric, all the time is, they didn't fit. They're not working out.
Yeah.
There's a problem with them. You know what? You recruited them, whatever the case may be, versus really kind of stepping back and saying, wait a minute, maybe is there a mental disconnect about what I think this individual should be doing or not? And I think, again, the bold gentlemen of this organization that were so courageous to let us do this impact performer, right?
Yep.
I mean, 4 owners that came to us and said, hey, you know what, we'll be a case study.
Yep.
And we know what an impact performer looks like, but we're going to humor you math and science people. So we're going to tell you what an impact performer looks like, and then what we want you to do is we want you to put the math and science to it.
Correct.
And we just want you to validate it. So you two go and have some fun, bring in your research team and have some fun.
Right.
Oh boy, were they shocked with the results.
Yeah, and I think it really, first off, I guess companies should be applauded for doing this work. And sometimes we don't do enough of that, and I think that's something that I really want to grow in doing. And in fact, the people who are watching this should be applauded even for just listening to
right.
think about how
Yes.
to use this information. But for so many times I'll hear, well, I built this rubric, and this rubric I'm now going to use to evaluate these potential employees, and if you score high on this rubric, you're guaranteed to be successful. But this example right here that you're referring to, I think is a remarkable case study that for years, these individuals thought that this was the template for a successful employee. And all of their rubrics, all of their analyses were based off of that, what I call assumption. That's what it is, an assumption on their biased opinion. And lo and behold, when you then looked at the different assessments that we ran, the different metrics we ran, the different analyses we ran, what they thought was a top performer did not match up with what our research really showed. And it made you think, at least for me, how many other companies are running into the same issue? You think for years that this is now the successful employee. Maybe it is. But is that true today? I mean, the research that we now know and the time we live in today is different than what it was a decade ago, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago. Are you using rubrics that are older than even you are? Right.
What was really cool about this particular analysis is the descriptor of impact performer, the 4 owners, the 4 men couldn't even agree on. So that was what was so cool, because even when you just took the word, right, the descriptor, they were like, that's an impact performer. No, really, I don't really think so. So again, all those 4 perceptions, all those well-meaning business professionals, all came together with their individual hard drive narratives and said no, because they were relating it to their department.
Right.
But who was mining the store? Who was looking at that macro big picture? Who was really doing that?
Yeah.
And what they found out, and just even going through that, they recognized they didn't even agree on what the metrics were for an impact performer. So before we could even start the analysis, we really had to flush out that problem and even to agree. And it reminds me, Eric, because we had put out questions to our audience, and one of the questions that we got in regards to that is, here I am, recruiter, here I am, person who, I love my company, I'm trying to help, but I have an owner who doesn't prescribe to this, like he won't change, and I'm getting a ton of heat, because he just wants me to advertise more, and he wants me to do this, and he wants me to do that. But it never gets to what am I supposed to be doing more of.
Right. And I think it goes back to the idea, don't work harder, work smarter. And it really does need to be a question of why are you having this issue, how are you recruiting, and why are you recruiting that way? And I mean, ultimately people hate to hear that I might need to change. But I think what's important to know here is that we can provide that type of solution, and the solution that's offered will allow you to be able to have a customized solution to figure out that approach. I always think, bringing back to medicine, you want a potential set of treatments that's specific to your injury, that's specific to your disease. You don't want this cookie cutter approach because it might not work for you. Your circumstances are so unique. And I think that's important, that it has to go into the questions of how you then are evaluating your customers.
And again, as a person who's, in the human capital space, you as an individual who's been in the research space and kind of combining our talents to get to that particular outcome. I too related to a drug trial. Mm-hmm. And what I think is that, you're just out there. And how many times would we ever let something go to market if we kept 10% of the population alive, right? If we killed 90%, yes, sign me up for that drug. Yet I see that in recruiting all the time. It's just that consistent madness.
Right.
And I think, again, when we're looking at this and I think about this particular woman, what I say is that I think we're a country of New Year's resolutions. And to your point, change is slow, and change is very methodical and well planned out.
Right.
But what I see again is this fixed mindset that I believe this is right, an owner believes this is right. How do we instill some growth mindset in there?
Right.
How do we do that? And again, not to the extent of an overwhelming or threat or whatever the case may be, but how do we take that bite-sized piece and make it happen? And I think with these particular gentlemen, again, we had a relationship with them. They had trusted us, mm-hmm. and they were feeling so much pain. They have a huge turnover.
Right.
We're hoping we don't have companies get to that point before they call us. We don't love life support.
Right.
But that's the bulk of who got, we're on life support. Please help us.
Well, and think of it again as a medical piece, and I think that's where it always hits home. None of us want to have that life-threatening disease. None of us want to have that debilitating injury. And so what can we do preemptively to prevent that? And just as everyone has those rubrics and assessments that they use, that's great. But give those a checkup. Mm-hmm. Let a third party now, like us, evaluate those. And are they congruent with the goals that you want? What are you here for? What are you seeking? And really, how can you now alleviate that pain? Because if that pain continues and that disease now starts to fester, how long is it going to be until your competition passes you over and surpasses you?
And what was so interesting about this case study was they didn't have anybody to promote.
Right.
So again, they were bringing on all these cogs, if you will, but they didn't have that one real superstar that they could take to the next level because they were hiring basically all the same people. Right. So to your point, how does your human capital strategy align with your business strategy? Mm-hmm. Is this a great person now? Or is it a great person tomorrow? And again, the brain loves same. The brain loves patterns. And you might look at Cheryl and say, wow, she's really different. No. But should you be saying no?
Well, and it's congruent based on your beliefs. So right. I like that person because they're doing the same thing as me. They're doing the same thing that's happened for years. But bring it back to the medical analogy. Would you want the same treatment from 1950s, or do you want the new cutting-edge right. information?
You'd be dead.
And so as a result,
he croaked.
Rather than let the company die and really stay stagnant, like
mm-hmm.
in this one here, that I can't promote someone, I don't have the opportunity to grow, I think it's a great way to now take a self-reflection of, well, how do we know that we're hiring the right person? How do we know that we're promoting the right person? How do we know that we're training the right person in the right way? And that's where it really takes, I think, a more data-driven approach to make sure that your assessments, your rubrics, are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. Hence this term validity that we talked about last time.
Exactly.
And it takes an outsourced, independent individual for us to now be able to go there and now really provide you a report card. Mm-hmm. Of where you stand. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. And I think even like in this particular case, what was so great about the experience is that when you bring in somebody from the outside, and there isn't that, for lack of a better word, pissing match between people,
right.
because we can remind them of what the outcome is.
Yep.
We can remind them of the goal. So we don't want to get involved in hurt feelings. We want to get involved in getting the cruise ship from this end to that end, mm-hmm. right? We're all on it. So let's no one fall off. No one hit the, some place in Italy and turn upside down.
Right.
We all want to be going together, and how can we do that? And I think in so many ways people get emotional positively because they want the best thing.
Right.
But I think with giving this company the results right here, the results that we gave them, how that impacted how they advertised. Mm-hmm. We had to retrain the recruiters. In this particular case, the recruiters weren't even interviewing for an impact performer.
Yep.
They weren't advertising for an impact performer. Their social media was not reflective of an impact performer. Their job description was not. I mean, this could not have been more mismanaged.
Right.
If we had set out to make it mismanaged, you know? So I think, again, from that vantage point, just how this, taking them out of it, using all their data, crunching it, doing all of this, and how it literally transcended
right.
the way in which they approached this. They were having such a hard time finding quality people when they really weren't quality people at all.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting about all the questions that we received, and the kind of general analysis was, the people came into us and said, here's how we identify our impact performer. But they never defined what that impact performer was and how they were operationally defining what success was. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, their assumptions, really, their opinions of what was success was all gravitated then based on their own opinion. Mm-hmm. And that's what drove their questions. And you now have to hope that your opinion is what's going to now lead you to the best medication. But as we know, that's not likely going to happen.
Exactly, and it certainly didn't happen in this particular case study and the different things that we found. And, you know, since we're on this medical topic, I don't know, you know, this is like a runaway train.
Yeah.
You know, and what's the temperature? I mean, it's pretty clear, right? What's the temperature? You have a data point.
Yeah, right.
So what is the temperature? And, you know, we always talk about that because obviously we have a recruiting division. When we get that call and we say, well, they're not a fit. Well, what's their temperature?
Right. I mean, I think that's, the most challenging clients to reach. All of us are going to go to the hospital to the doctor when our fever is 102, 103. But it's those that are at 99, 100. They feel a little pressure, but they're okay. They're still seeing profits. They're still seeing growth. But think of how much more you're missing out.
Yeah.
Think of how much bigger you could be. Think of how much more successful you could be. Think of how much more you could blow your competition out of the water if you were just making sure that you could answer that question of why.
Yeah.
Why are your employees doing what they're doing? Are you accurate in how you're evaluating them? And how do you know you're using the proper tool? Because from all the questions that we got, I am genuinely fearful of how those employees are being hired and how they're being evaluated and how they're being recruited, because I think there's a lot of inherent bias in many of those questions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And again, I think what was interesting, the one question that we got is that, well, wait a minute, do we have to do this for all the different roles? And certainly from a macro standpoint, you want that individual who has the mindset of your organization. So if your company is a mindset of accountability, mm-hmm. or a mindset of ownership, or you Inc. as we fondly refer to it, then you of course are looking for that individual who either aligns with that or can be trained to align with that or whatever the case may be. But again, if you're talking about customer service versus engineering, yeah, there has to be different data points
right.
for success.
Right.
And again, we're great word vomiters. No matter what, we don't put a lot in writing, right? And in the entrepreneurial sector, we see it all the time. Joe, and I told them, no, we talked about this. And when I ask for paper, mm-hmm. when I ask for an email, when I ask for something that we can read so the brain can interpret it, it is a rarity.
Right.
Right? So again, from that vantage point, yes, the answer is you can certainly have that macro job description, right? And then from that standpoint, how then do you customize it per person? Let's go back again to that medical analogy. Clearly the doctor does something different than the x-ray tech.
Right.
All right? All the well-being of that particular person. Yes, I broke my wrist. I need surgery. Now I have to go to the surgeon.
Right.
So again, how do we all come together to make me whole?
Well, and I think it's a really challenging question to answer because it's one of those, it depends. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not going to give someone this intensive year treatment when they have a brush burn on their hand. You know, so I think it really does have to be where the strategy fits with the state of the company. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is always interesting, is that I can provide that kind of unbiased third party, and we provide that independent type of analysis in that you can now see a company that really now has a huge cultural and systemic issue might now need more assistance and a developed plan, whereas for another one that's just having, let's say, problems in one department, you then solve that particular system. But you got to figure out what the heart of the issue is first.
Exactly, because it's rarely as it seems, that's
Correct.
for sure.
Right.
So I guess, as we kind of close out another quick time together, what I would say is that we had a question of how do you know, right? Like, how do you know when you've gotten that prototype right? The data supports it. I mean, how you know is it isn't your opinion. How you know it can be measured. How you know it can be analyzed.
Right.
That's how you know. If you're just taking a collections of well-intentioned minds and putting them in a room without creating some type of rubric or assessment or goal, then you're just, the chance of you getting riddled with opinion and bias and stereotypes and all of those things is incredibly high.
Well, and I think it follows that too is the question of how do I know if I even need to go through this process? And I think that's the more challenging one. But I can tell you that so many times when you see someone doing well, that's when now, what do I need to keep going with that? What do I need to do to get to that next level? And that's where I think it takes a third-party observer to really now independently say, you know what, some of these assessments don't match up with your goals. Some of the ways that you're evaluating your employees don't match up with your mission statement. Some of the ways that you're recruiting don't really fit the position. Even the position itself isn't what you think it to be. And if you can answer that question and set of questions, that's when you now are on that plan for success. Now you have a very effective strategy going forward.
Right. And certainly, our intent is always to answer as many questions as possible. I know some of them, I receive phone calls, I answer directly in time because we have such limited time. But please keep the questions and comments and topic suggestions coming. We read them. It's incredibly valuable to us.